Hi, I'm Jon Bushey, and we're back at the 7-ton again. I'm doing some maintenance. This time, we're going to talk specifically about the air compressor. So we're on the driver's side of the truck. I've removed the fender cover, and the air compressor is here at the front of the engine. So to give you a little background on the air compressor, some people call it the brake air compressor. That's kind of a misnomer. On this particular truck, the air compressor drives the brakes, it drives the CTIS, and there's also a lot of other systems. For example, the differential locks for the axles, those are air driven. So the air compressor is a pretty important piece of equipment. Bendix, according to Bendix, the manufacturer of this unit, they say 90% of the time the pump works just fine, and that if you're having a problem, it's a problem someplace else. But I think what they meant was, other than the regular maintenance, the pump works forever, and there's very little problems with the pumps themselves. If you're having an air problem, you need to check the other things, because the air pump is just the heart of the system. It creates the air pressure. The air pressure then goes back to the air dryer and the air cooler and all those parts towards the back of the truck. So there could be a problem there. The intake side, there's hardly ever any problem other than the hose. And Bendix says always check your hoses, because even a small problem with one of the hoses can cause air leaks and all kinds of problems. The air for this air compressor comes from the turbo side of the engine, and so the air has already been cleaned through the normal air filter. It's already been put through the turbo, and it's then taken off the intake to the engine. So the air that's coming over here in the intake side is this on this flat side. That intake air is already cleaned. It's already got a little bit of pressure. It might be hot because it's coming after the turbo. And so you don't really need to worry about the input side to the air compressor. The output side goes back to those other systems, and there could be a problem there. The other place there could be a problem is this compressor turns on and off. Now it's gear driven off the engine, so the air compressor itself doesn't turn on and off. The way they control the pressure is the valves will open on the air compressor, and therefore it's not building up pressure anymore. So that's the way of turning off the pressure. When your tanks have reached 100 psi or 125 psi, then the pump stops pressurizing the air, but it's still turning. So that part of the pump is called the unloader, the part that stops the air from compressing once the tanks have reached pressure. And that's the part that needs maintenance from time to time, the unloader circuit or the unloader valves. And that's what we're going to be working on today. By the way, this is a Bendix Tu-Flo 750, and it's a dual. There's two pistons in there moving up and down. Some air pumps have just a single cylinder. This one's a 2-cylinder. So there's going to be 2 unloader valves that we need to do the maintenance on today. Oh, by the way, the reason I'm doing all of this, so when I would turn off the truck, I could hear some air leaking, a hissing noise from under the engine. And so I got poking around, and I found out the noise was coming from the air compressor. In fact, I poked around the air compressor a little bit, and I could feel air coming from the top where the unloader circuit is. And so I knew, oh, okay, I've got to fix that unloader circuit. And they make a kit to fix that. So it's a maintenance thing, or it's a common thing you have to deal with. The tools required are a 1/2 inch to remove the bolts. There's 5 bolts holding on the plate that's on the top of the air compressor. We need to take that plate off, and so you're going to need a 1/2 inch and also a 9/16. Once you get all that taken apart, then you need pliers, you need pliers to pull the valves out, and then once you've done all that, you need to clean the plate and you need to clean the top of the compressor. I use a wire brush and a razor blade because when you put the new gasket on there, everything needs to be really clean because of course there's a lot of pressure on the pump. One thing I didn't mention before is there's a valve here in the engine compartment, and that valve controls whether the air compressor turns on and off. In other words, it turns on that unloader. And that valve's here, and so that's another thing to check, is that valve checks the pressure in the tanks, and when the air pressure has gotten to the limit of what you want, 100, 125, then this valve sends a signal back to the air compressor to say, okay, open your valves and just run free. Don't compress air anymore. So that's another thing to check, is that valve. Okay, let's get started. To start this process, the first thing we need to do is take off the plate at the top of the air compressor. I've already removed one bolt, and let me show you the other 4 bolts that are on there. Removing those 4 bolts, and then the plate will come off. It's usually stuck on there pretty good, so you might have to pry off that plate using some kind of a chisel or something. And remove the other 4 bolts, and then it'll come off. All right, I've pulled the 5 bolts out, and so now the plate's loose. I can just grab it. Here's the plate. I had it out before and I painted it to make it look all nice. So we've removed the plate. This is just sitting on the top of the air compressor. I've already cleaned it all off. That's really important, to clean this and clean the top of the air compressor. The valves sit underneath this in the air compressor. And so the next step, after we've removed the plate, is to remove the valves. Pulling out the valves is pretty easy. I'm just using a regular wrench here. Some people say to use a needle nose, but I don't think that that works. So there's one of the valves, and there's a spring in there too. Let me grab that spring. There, and these are the parts that are going to be replaced. They don't look bad actually, but let me show you the new parts. Now, of course, this video is for educational purposes only. We're not making recommendations on what you should do, and we're not making recommendations on your particular truck or what might be wrong. So you're at your own risk if you follow, this procedure. And here's the box of the new parts. This is available at Fleet Pride and all the big truck places. Very common part to get, and fairly cheap. This one was between $20 and $30, something like that. Inside are the install instructions, and of course the bag of parts. And the bag of parts includes 2 new valves, 2 springs, the gasket, and of course a pack of silicone to put on the O-rings of the valves. I've already compared the old valves to the new valves, and they're the same, and the springs are the same. So basically the assembly procedure is you take the springs, you drop them in that hole. After you've cleaned everything, that's important, clean up everything. Then you take the spring, you drop it in the hole, you put the valve on top of it with the grease on there. Then you go to the other cylinder, put the spring in, put the valve in, and then you put this gasket on the top of this plate, and the plate goes back on top. Bolt everything together. The torque specs are in the instructions. It's about 200 inch-pounds. And then go ahead and test it. Should be good after that.